On this episode of the AAF Exchange, the Senate clears OBBBA and President Trump protects TikTok for now. Joining us to discuss all of this is AAF President Douglas Holtz-Eakin and later on Director of Technology and Innovation Policy, Jeff Westling. Doug, thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
So I know there's a lot on your mind, but if you could just pick one thing, what's been on your mind recently?
So I have finally gotten concerned about the independence of the Fed.
Okay.
And for a long time, I have downplayed fears about the president's tendency to mouth off about the Fed chair and the Fed. And he did this when he was president the first time. We've seen more recently. Because in my experience, every president thinks the Fed chair is doing a terrible job. Every administration tells the Fed chair they're doing a terrible job. They just do it in private. And the Fed chair ignores them and goes back and does their job. And so I never thought this was a big deal. But his constant carping about needing lower rates has started to make me wonder, because we had two sitting governors, Waller and Michelle Bowman, say that they thought they favored rate cuts in July. And so for the first time, I started thinking, wait a minute, maybe they're saying that because they want to be the next chair, not because there's a material weakness in the economy. And that means that the monetary policy signal is getting muddied by the politics.
Yeah.
And I don't like that. I should never be thinking that. But you can't help but think it now, because he's made it such a big deal.
Yeah.
And he's threatened to replace Powell prematurely. I'm going to name a successor now.
Yeah.
It's got to stop. And what I really don't understand, I've never understood this about this president, it's not in his interest. He wants the economy to perform well. There's tons of evidence that independent monetary authorities produce better outcomes than those that aren't independent. So leave him alone.
Yeah. It's definitely a patience thing for him. He's not. He just wants it to be good now. But also, yeah, it was. I think I saw Bassett on TV or in print the other day saying we're starting to review names and things like that. And we're a year away from
essentially, yeah,
from a new Fed chair. So
of course they should be doing that.
Yeah,
they shouldn't be talking about it.
Right. That's something you should always have somebody ready to go.
Yes.
Because
do the work.
If somebody leaves tomorrow for God forbid any reason, then you need to have somebody to step in to be the economy. Monetary policies are, or whatever.
This is something that the Council of Economic Advisors has always done as part of its sort of standing duties. Be vetting people for board of governors and chair positions, and so that work should be done.
Yeah. So do you think that you could? That this could start playing more of a role in going down the forward? Like, will future presidents start doing this?
I hope not.
Or is this just a
let's just step back and put aside the partisan piece of it. Independent monetary authorities produce better outcomes. We want better outcomes. So I do not hope anyone does this, regardless of party.
Interesting. All right, well, let's talk about something else.
Something we never talked about before.
Yeah, right. No. Well, we haven't talked about this. The Senate passed the One Big Beautiful Bill. That happened yesterday. We're recording on a Wednesday. The House should vote on it Thursday, either tonight or tomorrow.
Yep.
So let's review some of the key provisions in this. Start with taxes.
So the tax piece, which is, remember, the reason we have to do this. We have a 2017 tax law that's going to sunset at the end of this year. Failure to legislate in some form means a $425 billion tax increase next year, $4.5 trillion over 10 years, all of which would be, I think, a big policy error. So something has to happen. What do we get? We get really three different buckets of things. Bucket number one is extend current law. No real economic excitement there. People expect current law to be extended. We're fulfilling their expectations. It will do nothing for their behavior or growth or anything. Second bucket, genuine pro-growth investment incentives, expensing of equipment investment, expensing of R&D expenses, 4 years of expensing some manufacturing structures. All good stuff. Things that were in the 17 bill made permanent now. That'd be a good idea. Third bucket, payoffs on political promises, the ones you've heard so much about. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, special exemption for seniors, which substitutes for no tax on Social Security, deductibility of your auto interest if it's a domestic car, more generous deductibility of state and local taxes, all of that stuff, which I am not a big fan of. I don't think it's good tax policy. The good tax policy is broad-based low rates. This is chopping the base up, so it's going the wrong way. And I don't think it's going to do much for economic growth. So on the whole, we got a tax bill that's kind of an economic nothing burger. It's not going to do a lot. They're claiming big growth impacts, but I think there's just no case to be made that this adds up. The bigger problem is that they're counting on the tax bill to offset the headwinds from the tariffs. And that math doesn't look like it works to me. This isn't producing enough good stuff to offset the tariffs. Footnote to all this. There's a big chunk of cash that's going to go out early next year, especially around April at refund time, because they backdated all of this stuff, made it retroactive to January 1 of this year. So people are going to get big refunds next year. Right before the midterms, conveniently enough, there'll be a little bit of juice coming in. So look for that. But that has a serious sort of macro impact, because suppose in the second half of this year we get a slowdown, and I am very worried about that, maybe even go negative. Well, there's a pipeline of stuff that's going to pick up early next year, so there should be no concern over a sustained downturn of any type, I don't think.
Interesting. What about some of the provisions that you like to talk about? Energy has been a big one in this one.
Oh, I've tried not to discuss the energy stuff because it just makes me crazy. As you know, I was not a fan of the Inflation Reduction Act as a climate policy. I thought it was, this was just a mishmash of provisions that had, the cost per ton of carbon abated ranging from like $6 to $260. It was outrageously inefficient and just throwing money at things. So you might think that this would represent a departure from that and thus a disciplined energy policy or a disciplined climate policy or a disciplined something. And the answer is none of those things, right? And number one, it's not the end of the wind and solar industry. So, I'm sick of hearing people talk about how this is the death of clean energy. We have had tax credits for wind and solar since 2005. Mm-hmm. They were supposed to go away in 2015, and they lobbied and cut a deal to extend them for a couple more years, and then we put them on steroids in the Inflation Reduction Act. The infant industry argument is now 2 decades old. Get over it. I mean, it's time to just compete. Come on.
Yeah.
And in the same way, there is no defense of adding a production tax credit for coal, which is just like nonsense.
Yeah.
So these energy provisions aren't good energy policy, which is really just competitive markets. They aren't a climate policy. If you want to do that, do a carbon tax, get it right. And certainly, if you're claiming that you need this tax credit to stay in business, what I always say is, if you need a tax provision to stay in business, you don't have a business. You have a tax shelter, and you should go away.
Yeah.
And so, fine.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that. Let the market take care of it.
Other than that, I'm a fan.
Yeah.
Just for the record.
Well, hold on. Give us some of the highlights of what else is in this thing. Those add-ons that are also in this.
Let us count all the crazy things. Well, we have we double the lifetime exemption in the estate tax.
Yeah.
We have some good farm policy in there. I'm not sure that's true, but certainly we're going to raise the reference prices on all the crop subsidies by somewhere between 11 and 21%. So that money's going to go thundering out the door. We were going to do AI regulation, but that didn't make the cut. Mm-hmm. We were going to sell off some public lands. That didn't make the cut. The One Big Beautiful Bill did go on a diet from the Senate parliamentarian, but it's still a breathtakingly broad thing. We got the Medicaid reductions. We got the SNAP reductions. I know there's been a lot of huffing and puffing over Medicaid in particular, but it's hard for me to have much sympathy for this because we need to have a serious reform of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the entire entitlement side of the budget.
Yeah. It's
an imperative. And the notion that somehow it's just wrong to touch these things, sending that message is a mistake.
Yeah.
And these provider taxes are a gimmick. Let's face it, these are just a financial gimmick to pull money out of the federal government and put it into a state budget. In saner times, we would have, on a bipartisan basis, said no more of this. Yeah. Get rid of it. And we should.
I'll get back to the spending, the entitlement reform stuff in a second, but also what about the debt ceiling? That's
how can I forget that?
Yeah.
That's a good news thing. That is a very good news thing. I'm always worried about the debt ceiling and the financial volatility that surrounds showdowns over the debt ceiling. the Treasury has estimated that the X date is late August, might even be early September. If they get this over the finish line in the House and the president signs it, we will have raised the debt ceiling by $5 trillion without any financial market repercussions. That's great. And we've suffered downgrades from every rating agency, in part because of our inability to do things like raise the debt ceiling. So this is a good news. And the absence of another error is a good thing.
Yeah. So on the spending side of things, Speaker Johnson was out there floating this idea of doing another reconciliation bill later on. Putting aside for a second whether or not they would do that, what would that even look like?
It's not realistic for the following simple reason. You are not allowed to reform Social Security in reconciliation, period. So we need that's the most pressing one, right? Trust fund exhausts in 8 years. That's a short time. People trying to plan their retirements need to know what their benefits are going to be, and so it's time to do Social Security reform so the program's sustainable and people know the deal. And that's not a reconciliation issue. It can't be. And when we do that, it will carry along with it other reforms, because no one's going to do just Social Security in isolation and say, we're going to just do seniors. They're going to look across the board.
Yeah. So, anything on that nature would need broad bipartisan support, because you need the 60 votes. There's no way around that. In the House, a three vote margin of error is, that's a problem.
And then I'm really interested to see how the next presidential, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, how the next presidential is going to shape up, because if you run for president in 2028, you have to imagine it will be on your watch that Social Security reform gets done. I think it'd be smart to advise the voters of that fact. This is coming. We need to do this. I'm not saying you have to have a plan, but you have to be sort of matter-of-factly warning people that a big reform is needed and going to have to happen. It'll have to be bipartisan. We're going to have to work with everyone in Congress. The tone of those words is completely different than the finger-pointing and name-calling we've seen recently.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see how that plays out.
When was the last time something was attempted on that front?
Bush.
Was it Bush?
Yeah,
I was trying to think if there was a time before when he came out of re-election and was pushing that.
That was it. And that was a colossal failure. I mean, that was at CBO during that, and he didn't even get a vote. In a Republican-controlled House, he didn't even get a vote on the reform. That was bad.
Coming off of a almost landslide election, based off of current. But anyways, coming back to the current bill, the Senate finally passed this bill, as we talked about.
Yep.
So it's back to the House. What now?
It passes.
Yeah.
The question is, how many small dramas do we have to have before it passes? I expect that, take your favorite constituency, the fiscal hawks or the salt caucus or whatever. I expect some protests so that they remind the voters that they stood strong, and then ultimately they're going to cave. But so maybe they'll take a vote and it'll fail, and they'll have to pull the vote, and then they'll do it again and it'll go through. Whatever. Get people to change their votes. Have some drama with the president calling people and then walking out and changing their votes. I expect all of that.
Yeah,
but it's going to pass.
Interesting. Okay, so you think they'll by Friday, or will we have to wait another week after they come back?
If it's going to pass, just stop the suffering. Yeah. Let's get it over with.
Yeah, let's just move on to something else.
Please. And as a footnote, this has now become standard procedure in the Senate. The very last thing that Schumer did was raise objection to the title. It's birdable, so it's no longer officially the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
Yeah.
It's the Reconciliation Act with reference to HR 14.
Yeah. They did this. They did
this with the Inflation Reduction Act.
They did it with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Yes, they did. Right. So it's become a thing.
Yeah. Anyways, I don't have a trivia question for you today on policy, but I do have one on.
The trivia question is, when was the last time I didn't have a trivia question?
Yeah, I know. It's been a while.
Yeah.
But here's one for you. Who's the only team you were just out there? Who's the only team to never be to a World Series?
The Mariners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was looking at I came across that fact the other day as we were talking about, because you were just out in Washington, and
I watched a lot of Mariners games, and I'm done.
Yeah, I was surprised at that. Given there's a lot of new teams, like the Rays or the
I am surprised
Rockies.
too. And they've had Randy Johnsons and Ken Griffey's and Edgar Martinez's. I mean, they have had Hall of Fame caliber stuff.
Season where he was the manager and they won like 100 and some games, and that was unheard of back then.
I know.
And anyways, but
oh well.
Doug, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
I hope you have a good 4th.
I will have a great 4th. I hope you do as well.
Jeff, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a few episodes since we had you on, but you've been a little busy recently. This time, President Trump has, for a 3rd time, delayed the enforcement of the TikTok ban. Walk us through what's going on.
Yeah, so Congress passed a law last year that was essentially saying that TikTok needs to divest from its ByteDance, which is kind of controlled by the CCP, out of national security concerns. And the law allowed for one single 90-day extension of this kind of period where they had that 270 days to find a buyer. And despite that provision, the president has not ever used that specifically. He's just come out and said, I'm not going to enforce this ban. So Apple, Google, whoever's hosting the application, trust me, I'm not going to bring this against you, and basically pressured these companies into continuing to host the app. And his kind of approach is thinking like, I'm going to go find a buyer for this company, and it's going to be an American buyer, and we're going to do, make it great again, and that kind of thing. But this is just the latest extension, and it was originally in the law just 90 days is as long as it could have gone. It is, I believe, 210 now?
So just over
40? I think it's a lot. It was 275-day extensions and now another 90-day extension. Our smart economics audience can do the math on that one.
So just a little bit over the deadline on
just
that
a
one.
little over, just a little over.
So you've written a lot on this, and there's 2 explanations for why President and Congress are allowing yet another deferral of this ban. Neither is particularly good, so talk us through it.
Yeah, it's not so much an explanation, but it's just kind of the state of play. And I think there's 2 potential reasons, right? One is, look, the national security concerns that drove the passage of the bill might not be as significant as the Congress thought and as the Supreme Court accepted. Essentially, there's a lot of First Amendment concerns with this, but the court was like, look, these security concerns, and what the court cited to was like these privacy data security concerns where the app's tracking what you're doing and sending it over to the CCP. And that was enough to justify the infringement of speech that the law included. And maybe that's what's going on. We're saying, well, look, these security concerns aren't actually that big of a deal. People can get your data elsewhere. That's all bad because the Supreme Court relied on these arguments. And I think if we're being really honest, the real issues with TikTok were never really the data security things. Like, those were bad, but like, we have a lot of data security issues as it is. The real issue is them being able to, push out narratives and control kind of what Americans are seeing and viewing online. And it's just counterintuitive, and it's not good to have this infringement on the First Amendment and then it not really be justified. And that would be the first case. But the other alternative, and maybe better for the First Amendment perspective, is that the security concerns are very real, but nobody seems to care. And I think that's a lot more problematic, maybe not from a First Amendment perspective, but now we've got the president just saying we're going to extend these deadlines as much as we can. We don't care about the harms to Americans because I want to make the deal, and I like TikTok now. That's what he said after the election. Hey, they helped me get elected, so I want to keep it around. But either way, it's still a bad thing. Neither is a good outcome. We have a law; it should be enforced, and it's not being enforced.
From TikTok's perspective, though, they have to be happy.
Well, TikTok is happy in one sense in that they are still allowed to operate in the United States. In another sense, they're kind of in a really bad position, right? They don't need, when I say the White House doesn't need another law. The law has been passed. It is signed.
Yeah.
They don't need the courts to, TikTok can't challenge the law anymore. They've lost. The Supreme Court upheld it. So really all they have is assurances from the president that he's not going to enforce the ban. And that means that if they had like a 60 minutes type thing and the president was mad at them, they pretty much have to comply. If they don't comply, Trump could just be like, I'm going to enforce the law now. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
And there's no real recourse for that.
So they have them over a barrel.
Yeah, they really do. And I know there's been chatter recently that maybe they found buyers, so hopefully this will all be resolved soon. But, I mean, even if it is, I don't think that the underlying issues with this whole process will have just gone away, and I think they're going to be relevant in other areas too.
Interesting. So we'll have to keep it. You'll have to keep an eye on that for us and come back and tell us when the resolution happens.
Anytime.
Anyways, 4th of July is coming up. Any big plans?
I'm doing the most American thing you can do, which is going to Canada. So I will be playing a lot of golf and visiting some friends. So
I set you up for that one.
Yeah, a little bit.
But at least you're playing golf. That's all that matters.
Yeah, that's the American thing. I'm probably going to be drinking while I do it. So.
Perfect.
Yes.
Golf and drinking. That's perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Thanks, Kyle.